Welcome to Deleted Saves. On this episode, Red Dead Redemption 2 on PS4. Today's topic is one of those games within recent memory where the sheer volume of what has been written and spoken of regarding just about every single angle of the game is so extensive and rigorous that there could be PhD theses written based upon it, if there haven't been already. Truthfully, I'm not sure what I could say that has not already been covered, but then again, I'm not here to change hearts and minds. I'm here to speak my piece and be done. So let's get into it with 2018's Red Dead Redemption 2. Ever since Take-Two Interactive, Rockstar Games' parent company, bought the Red Dead brand from Capcom way back in the olden days of 2004 to turn it into its own thing, this series has oddly languished among their properties, and the Grand Theft Auto series has far and away proved to be the unkillable cash cow of the Rockstar stable. In 2010, Red Dead Redemption proved the viability of the Western as a video game genre. But then GTA 5 came out and blew the proceeds of Red Dead out of the water, and has continued to do so continuously for a literal decade now. So Red Dead 2 comes to us almost as an afterthought, a loss leader, a wonderful little in-house art project, while GTA does the heavy lifting and rakes in all the proceeds. And considering what absolute dog shit GTA 5 is, especially since it entered my illustrious hall of shame of games that got precisely 1 hour of my time before I ripped it out of the disk drive and got rid of it, never to be seen again, I would way rather take this little art project than their mass market titan. But of course, I would like to remind the gaming public that Take-Two Interactive is directly responsible for cursing all of us with Iron and Blood Warriors of Ravenloft, with money from that game that may have directly brought us the GTA series. And since I believe in never letting anyone live down their mistakes, may I offer them that stick upon which to trip them while they take a 10-year victory lap. In any case, what is Red Dead Redemption 2 all about? Well, if you are unaware by this point, Red Dead 2 takes place in the year of 1899, when the days of the Old West, at least as we know them from more fiction than fact, are at the end as civilization creeps ever closer to ending the twin falsehoods that a man could make his own destiny in the wide world, and that the government, in capital letters, was something that only happened back east to bloated senators and filthy big city slums. Manifest Destiny had served its purpose by sending a chaotic horde of former slaves, ex-cons, and busted Civil War fighters, outcast losers, and dumbstruck immigrants ever westward to tame the land and take what they could from the native peoples already living there, in place of loyal but finite supplies of soldiers. But now Uncle Sam is coming to collect his due and yank on the reins, reminding all of these citizens living between Washington and Los Angeles, or from El Paso to Seattle, who they really owed their allegiance to. But that is just one of the themes of this game. Another is the loss of family and the end of the days of the outlaw, both of which are encompassed in the body of the Vanderlyn gang, a wild collection of killers, counterfeiters, loan sharks, prostitutes, thieves, and survivalists who have banded together over the years into a loose idea of a family, considering none of them have any other family to return home to after their years of criminal activity. We take on the persona of Arthur Morgan, an outlaw in his mid-30s, or thereabouts, raised by Dutch Vanderlyn and his longtime friend and co-villain Hosea Matthews. It is through Arthur that we will witness these last days of the independent man, so he believes, and through which we can effect change in the open world before us. Well, up to a point anyway, but we'll get to that. Arthur and the gang are on the run from a botched bank robbery in the city of Blackwater, somewhere in our half-fictionalized America, and it could be anywhere from Tucson to Texas. And we are broke and desperate. They head into the mountains, which could be the Rockies, or the Alps for all we know, Rockstar chose to mix so much fiction and reality that it hardly matters. And I get why it was done. To be able to parody American life and American history without coming under fire from defamation lawsuits if possible. Hint, they didn't quite manage that. Although it makes me wonder why a British game company would not just continue to take the absolute piss out of the colonies, as the Brits like to do, and just use actual places and names. It's not like they have to worry about the legal quagmire that is the First Amendment. It's not a law that pertains to them. Well, I'm not a lawyer, and I couldn't give a shit less otherwise. Anyway, the gang is losing members left and right, freezing and starving, and Arthur has to help get everyone organized, fed, and warm. The first few missions are just that, learning to navigate the world and actually worry about tending to the physical health needs of people. This is also where the hunting and foraging minigames come into play, which you will utilize for the rest of the game. But it is not long before we find the inciting incident of the game itself. A rival gang whom Dutch has an old history with and hates is on this mountain too. And after they accidentally save a female homesteader from being turned into the fuck puppet of their rivals, after the rivals already killed her husband and stole all the goods and booze, they beat information out of one of the rival gang members to tell them that Dutch's rival gang is planning a train robbery. Arthur and the boys raid the enemy camp and steal the plans and dynamite to get the train robbery done, robbing oil magnate Leviticus Cornwall, something Hosea thinks is a really, really bad idea, but one which Dutch thinks is fantastic, hinting rather heavily that Dutch is actually a fucking idiot and a bad leader. The robbery goes well, and the gang can get off the mountain, but they have made a tenacious enemy, reminding us of another dark reality of American life. Rape and murder are fine as long as the victims are poor, but never steal from the rich, because they have the resources and power to absolutely destroy you. The party make a weak allusion to the idea that the land they are traveling along used to belong to the Native Americans, who were murdered en masse and shoved onto reservations, and the quote-unquote poor buggers really got shafted by the government. But we don't come back to this until late in the game. From there, we go to the new camp, Arthur's default home, while he buys guns and outfits to play dress-up with, which is nearby to the cattle town of Valentine, a place good for nothing else but cheap booze, cheap female company, and thousands in rancher cash. I'm not going to detail absolutely everything in this review. This is an open world game, and the missions can be played in any order, along with side content and random events which Rockstar took years to craft and sprinkle in along with the points they were trying to make about life during these historic periods. But from this point, I'll try to hit the highlights. Arthur, in his capacity as thug and killer, goes about doing the bidding of the rest of the gang by driving the girls around, getting into fistfights, bounty hunting as a side job, recovering the gang's drug-addled reverend, and other jobs that would gather that distant golden idea of just enough money so that Dutch can enact his master plan that would allow the team to head back out west to true freedom, or perhaps leave the US altogether for other grand places in the world where a man with a half-baked plan and a gun can somehow enact his will upon the land and society at large, despite the fact that historically that has never happened and has never ever worked out. There is a side job here that you will need to do that will, surprisingly, have long-lasting effects on the rest of the game, but we'll get to that too. Arthur, as characters go, is a pretty rough dude. He has a lot of common sense, but not much in the way of general education, as most of his was done thanks to Dutch and Hosea teaching him where they could. But Arthur has a certain wisdom about him, and a rough honor, the kind one might expect of a character like Rooster Cogburn. You can, of course, make some decision about how Arthur behaves, either making him a noble outlaw, a Robin Hood type, or a killer with keen observations. Arthur is a man caught between worlds, realizing his way of life is essentially over, but having to learn to remake himself in a more modern world. He has a lost love he cannot get over, and has an intense rivalry with two of his gang members, Micah Bell, who he really hates, and rightly so, and John Marston, the main character of the first Red Dead Redemption game, who he feels is uncommitted to the gang, flighty, and too stupid to be of benefit. He is also a man outside his time, genuinely anti-racist in an area where racism was common, and a feminist of a sort long before such a thing was a thought. He begins forming a genuine friendship with Sadie Adler, the woman who he rescued at the game's beginning from the O'Driscoll gang, the rival gang that Dutch hates, that could have blossomed into more were it not for the flame Arthur holds for another. But Arthur also holds a wry, dry sense of wit, able to quip with the best of them. He comes back with quick rejoinders to the sometimes insane things he encounters among his fellow Americans, and I could swear from time to time he breaks the fourth wall to the player with the things he says, seemingly channeling the thoughts of one of the main writers of the game, former Vice President Dan Houser, as this was his last game at Rockstar, seemingly almost screaming for the player to stop and actually take a closer look at the thing he was lampooning beyond just being in a sometimes funny drama piece of cowboys and lawmen video game. Arthur is complex, and he sees his world in a complex way, sometimes despite the crazy bullshit actions the player can take. But Arthur is also a game character. He gains health upgrades and improves his stamina, completes missions that net him better guns and improved ability to control his horse. He can heal from near death with simple potions, and never seems to need to eat or sleep, unless the player is looking to pass the time or recover health. So both sides of the character need to be taken into account as we go forward. In time, Arthur builds his relationships with each of his fellow gang members. In breaking Micah out of jail, he ends up killing half a town, and would have shot Micah too, were it not for how much Dutch values Micah's advice. He comes to learn more about John, and the two men let their rivalry cool to a point where they develop a grudging respect for one another. He spends time with Hosea, who is like a father figure, and learns more about his fellow camp friends Charles Smith and Lenny Summers, and how they as black men in post-Civil War America have to survive, which is often very different from their white counterparts. There are more, but they are far too many to be detailed here. I do have to end this review eventually, after all. But hanging all over this is the needs of the gang, by which I mean Dutch's needs and whims. In time, Dutch's train robbery of the Cornwall oil fortunes comes back to bite everyone in the ass, as Cornwall and his mercenaries, as well as encroaching Pinkerton agents seeking to destroy the gang, as they are seen as a roadblock to finally civilizing the West, cause the gang to flee south, and I mean into the deep south, where the dregs of the Confederacy still try to rise again and again. I'm not kidding. Arthur can even run into the KKK, where Klansmen are rightfully portrayed as bumbling idiots, usually killing themselves trying to burn crosses and set up clandestine forest meetings. While there, the gang gets involved trying to scam both the Gray and Braithwaite families, with the merest shitty rumor of Confederate gold being hidden around their lands, and realizing the two families control everything for miles around them, from land to law, except for the major city of Saint Denis, our New Orleans stand-in, and they begin to learn that they do not have the power they think they do. In this chapter, we begin to see the collapse of the Vanderlyn gang, where side characters we got to know and even rescued in the previous chapter begin getting killed off. John Marston's son is kidnapped by a crime boss secretly running Saint Denis that the gang must try to schmooze and double-cross for their own disaster, again and again having to move camp and run from the law and gangs bigger than them, and finally setting up a bank robbery in Saint Denis that goes so badly it ends with Hosea dead, John Marston in jail, and the team scattered, with Dutch, Arthur, and a few select others getting caught up in a storm while the ship they escaped on, with no money of course, sinks off the coast of the semi-tropical island of Guarma, and they get caught up in a revolution where former plantation slaves are trying to overthrow a sugar plantation owner just to secure transport back to the mainland U.S. One of these tropical destinations was Dutch's plan. But of course now, seeing that the rest of the world is embroiled in deep shit in Shinola, He decides to head back and recover the gang's savings to head even further, to Australia perhaps. Dutch keeps moving the goalposts when his fuck-awful plans keep falling through. And when Arthur calls him out on his bullshit, Dutch begins to suspect Arthur's loyalty to the gang. And Micah is only too happy to pour verbal poison into Dutch's ear about Arthur. On the run again, the gang's falling apart. Dutch is losing his grip on the gang and reality. The Pinkertons are on their asses, and he begins to believe someone is an informant. When Arthur and Sadie spring John from prison, Dutch freaks out because they did it too early for his plan. Dutch makes Micah his right-hand man in place of Arthur, and he murders Cornwall. Again, this is America. Never threaten the rich, they will always win. Dutch's girlfriend is killed by the camp madam trying to defend him, and against all good sense, Dutch and Micah plan to rob the army payroll, a job which will go even worse than the Saint Denis bank job when Dutch and Micah lose their minds. Dutch abandons the gang, and Micah is named as the real Pinkerton informant. Yet, there is something more insidious among us. Remember when I said a side job way back in Valentine would change the course of the game? Well, that farmer Arthur was beating to get loan money back from, and coughed/spat on him, was in the final stages of tuberculosis, and he infected Arthur. If you play the game a second time, as the chapters go on, you will note Arthur coughs at random times. Sadly, this is not just good motion capture and humanized characterization. It's the early telltale sign. But by the late chapters, Arthur is dying, and he is seeking to somehow make his rotten life as a killer and thug have meaning. This is going to depend on the player and how this plays out. But I played it on the high honor route, so Arthur does make some amends. He cannot fix a lifetime of bad decisions and bloodshed, but he is able to balance the scales at least somewhat. And this will determine Arthur's death. Yes, Arthur dies in the end. If he has high honor, he succumbs to his illness while trying to stop Micah. But if he has low honor, Micah kills him. Either way, Arthur ends his days cold and alone on a rainy mountain trail where no one will remember him. But that isn't the end of the story. Several years later, in 1907, we pick up the reins as John Marston, trying to make his way legitimately across the country with his wife and son. But old habits die hard, and John, yet again on the verge of losing his own family due to his blunt, callous lack of wisdom, and his wife believing he truly does not want to change, is now in debt after taking out a bank loan to build a ranch for his family, and discovers Micah Bell is still alive and has formed his own gang. John works with Sadie, Charles, and the old camp layabout uncle to take down Micah, and he kills Micah in the end, with the additional help of Dutch, who is very much accidental, who is still alive and shoots Micah in frustration. But this allows him to claim the Vanderlyn treasure to pay off his bank debt. But of course, this also puts John back on the radar of the Pinkertons, who have never forgotten that the Vanderlyn gang was one of the ones that got away, for now. And this foreshadows the events of Red Dead Redemption 1, which I have reviewed previously on the show. And we already know how that game ends. That was still a lot to talk about, even just keeping to the highlights. This game was in development for many years. Initially, it was claimed the setup was made during the production of Red Dead 1. Maybe, I don't know. It is Rockstar, so I'm not prone to believing them. But who can say? In any case, it was developed in full once GTA 5 was out the door and raking in buckets full of cash. And supposedly Red Dead 2 is one of the most expensive games ever developed. They detailed many things in this game. Clothes, eating animations, how horse testicles react to the cold, I'm not kidding about that, to the point where they were accused of abuse and crunch culture just to quote-unquote polish the game. I guess this is, at this point, hypocritical of me to point out because I bought a copy and enjoyed it, so therefore contributed to crunch culture and abuse. But remember, even if you buy a game just to shit on it or call out developers, there is no such thing as ethical consumption under capitalism, and many times calling them out is free advertising for them. I can see the detail work on display, but quite frankly, it is the point of being overdone and pointless. Do I really need to see the rust on my guns over time if I don't clean them regularly? It is a video game after all, not a life simulator. I love history and historic fact as much as the next guy, but sometimes the verisimilitude gets in the way of the fun. But whatever, I guess. Red Dead 2 was received by critics and fans with almost universal acclaim, with dozens of outlets giving the game highest awards and ratings, giving the game a 97 out of 100 on Metacritic, which is rare. The praise for Arthur as a character was high, with some saying he had a humanity generally lacking in other Rockstar games. Praise for the complexity and depth of the open world is universal, and many said the twist ending, because if you play the previous game to the end, you knew that there was no Arthur mentioned, so even without spoilers, you had to know Arthur would not make it to the end, and epilogues were compelling, some of the best in gaming. Even non-gaming journalistic outlets, if you flatten that term out and stretch it beyond its means, like GQ and USA Today, recognized Red Dead 2 as not only a thing that exists, but how well it had been received. And when you can get outlets like that do their best to occasionally remind the larger public that video games are only for kids or basement-dwelling losers even in the 2020s, then you must have done something right. Or you don't know what to say because the game had a cultural impact and you cannot blame a mass shooting on it. But others were more concerned about the social messagings, saying while it was good to try and point out the social evils of the day, that Rockstar instead dropped the ball when it depicted the plight of native peoples of the Americas. I mean, what did you expect of a British game company to say about that? A country that still has worldwide colonies. Not nearly as many as the modern United States, mind you, but we did borrow from their blueprint. And along with the French and the Spanish, got that whole oppress and slay Native Americans ball rolling. But I guess just by saying it out loud, something will bring about change. It's never happened yet in the whole of human history, but you never know. I guess it could. Keep wishing for that shit, folks. But it's a good critics-approved game. The thing sold millions. But not, of course, as much as GTA 5 or its GTA Online opponent. But enough for Rockstar to not be embarrassed by it completely. But now it's time for my personal thoughts on the game. I, like many of you out there, have played a number of Rockstar and Take-Two interactive titles. A few of them have been good and memorable. Most I wouldn't piss on if they were on fire. But at this point in my gaming experience, both Red Dead Redemption games are the only games Rockstar ever made that have been worth a good goddamn. These characters and their worlds are the only ones fully fleshed out and fully realized, or at least as close as we can get to in those games. Look, let's stop fooling ourselves. Games will never be equal to the depth of complexity of real life, and nor should they. They are just, as far as their companies are concerned, disposable entertainment. But in a shallow medium, the depth of a water-filled pothole is king. For my money, few others come close. And those that do are probably not the ones you have been led to believe should be praised. Its approachable setting, one close to the heart of the nature of America, seen through the eyes of someone not embroiled in the culture. I do not say that in some sort of twisted version of patriotism. No dick-waving, flag-bearing, red, white, and blue fuck you to cultures not birthed on this strip of land on one continent on Earth. The Red Dead series screams America more than Grand Theft Auto ever did. The good, bad, even worse, and ugly all at the same time. And here's a hot take I've had for a while about Red Dead Redemption 2. This game is, pound for pound, one of the greatest survival horror games of its generation. One of the things the reviewers never pointed out, and this game does not point out too clearly itself, is that the setting Arthur finds himself in is one of the most haunted and demon-possessed in recent memory that is not explicitly a scary game. If you poke around the game long enough, Arthur will confront no less than 4 active hauntings: a ghost train, a ghost in the Saint Denis Cemetery, a haunting in the swamps of the south, and the murmurings of the wood of the northeast. 2 different alien encounters, a no-shit for-real vampire in the nighttime streets of Saint Denis, an exorcist-level possessed woman locked in an outhouse, a wolf man in the woods to the northeast, two cannibal cults, probable time travel, a village under the sway of the literal devil whose pentagram appears every night under a home, a massive cryptid snake corpse in the trees near an abandoned town, and an abandoned shack in which one can find a painting that slowly fills in as the game progresses to show the portrait of the strange man, a top hat wearing unkillable NPC first met in the previous game, and who is known amongst the community as the incarnation of Death himself. Hell, I may have even missed a few. Red Dead 2 lives up to the dead in its name, in more than just its dead-eye time-slowing meter mechanic. I assume that they were just taking the piss out of their own game and themselves, and having released a zombie survival side story for the previous game. But goddamn if they didn't do creepy well in this game. Nighttime alone is chilling, and if you are hunting predatory animals during that time, as you can do that, it is scary enough without having a specter from the deep backwoods suddenly coming to manifest and mistaking you for its ex-lover. But Red Dead Redemption 2 is just, at its base, a good game. It's a long game, close to 100 hours, if you are looking to do most everything and enjoy wandering the landscape, looking for treasures or animal pelts or whatever. And I'm not going to lie, that's a mark against it. Jesus, I don't have time to wander the land looking for everything. And at some point, I'm just not going to keep repaying it. This is a game you complete not in weeks, but over a few years if you know what's good for you. Or if, like most grown adults who do not work in the games review industry, you can only play for an hour or two at a time because of real-life obligations. I guess that's one way to keep your product relevant after its initial debut period. But will we see a Red Dead 3? I honestly don't know. It was 8 years between the first two games, with a lot of denying by Rockstar that a sequel is in the works. But they were able to keep it close to the chest. This is one of, those games from Rockstar where they're happy to keep close to the chest and lie about until they debut. But now, one of the game's in-house champions is gone, and the board of directors has publicly noted before that Red Dead games do not make GTA money, and are therefore not as important. And even if they did, where would it go? Back in time even further into the 1800s? Move it up to the early 1900s in the post-World War I era when names like Capone and Dillinger held sway? Go back to the pirate days of the Age of Sail? Silly as it sounds, it may be an idea. Do we even need another game in this series? Actually, I don't think so. I think everything that needs to be said has been said. We can only replay and relitigate history so much before it becomes cartoonish and asinine, or adds so much fantasy elements that it might just as well include pointy-eared elves and bearded dwarves with Scottish accents. I do think that Arthur, John, and the Vanderlyn gang, all now having been driven off into that eternal sunset by both the encroachment of the law and of ever-progressive and regressive civilization and the entropic movement and momentum of time, have played their hand well and done all they can do, shown us a somewhat living glimpse of a time that was yet only as a simulation, but shown us that they are just, as a singer once said, a whisper in time. The past is the past, the golden ages are mostly behind us, and let's be honest, they weren't that golden to begin with. And some people and lifestyles are no longer wanted, necessary, or viable. There's a reason we don't do this cowboy gunslinger shit anymore, kids. And there will be a reason that the lives we live now will, someday not too far off, no longer be viable or workable. Red Dead Redemption 2 is everything it was made out to be. I'd say play it if you haven't, but I think I have a feeling many of you listening have already tried it out and decided for yourselves what you think. But again, this review is just what I thought, a review to be lost among the vast sea of the famous and infamous who talk about games and have far more acolytes than this little show ever will and have already moved on to other things. But for you wonderful few, now you have one more opinion. Like the men of that bygone age, like Arthur Morgan himself. I have spoken my piece, and am now done. Thank you for listening. Deleted Saves would like to thank Brad, Keith Gasper, Orden Wells, and Mass Lama for being patrons of the show. If you would like to become a patron of the show, please go to patreon.com and check out Deleted Saves podcast. All donations go directly towards maintaining the show itself. Thank you.